What's up guys, it's National Master DemApples here, back again with another video, and today I'm going to be giving you a complete guide on the Queen's Gambit. Now, in order to understand the Queen's Gambit, you really have to understand this thing called the Carlsbad structure. Take a look at the position on the board. This is the Carlsbad structure, and just take a look at the pawns. So, generally, as a rule of thumb in chess, you want to attack the direction your pawn chain is, and clearly White's pawn chain is pointing towards the queen side, and Black's pawn chain is clearly pointing towards the king side. So, that is where each side will attack. Usually, White's king is hiding over here, because it's kind of unsafe to be here without the c-pawn. But usually the kings are here and here, and that's how it works in the Queen's Gambit decline. And the Carlsbad structure occurs in many different openings as well. So let's take a look at this. What is White's plan in this structure? Well, usually White wants to throw his pawns up the board, weaken this pawn, and of course this is just a skeleton, right? But there are more pieces. There's like rooks, there's queens, there's minor pieces. But White's main idea is to attack this pawn. He wants to attack this pawn and take the pawn. Why does he want to take the pawn? Well, you notice this hole on c5? If White can eliminate the defender of this pawn and bring a rook here to attack this pawn, he will win it and probably win the game because the rest of his position is completely solid. So what is Black going to try to do? Well, Black has to defend. And in the meantime, remember, his pawn chain is pointing towards this direction. And so if you want to win, Black has to attack on the king side, like around here, because White's king is going to be living here. And there's nothing, like White's going to have to defend. And if Black doesn't put on enough pressure, White's going to do whatever he wants on the king side, queen side, and have free reign, win a bunch of pawns, and win the game. So let's take a look at an example of what I'm talking about. We have the game between Jose Capablanca and Harry Golombek. And studying older games is really beneficial because most of the times the better player, because like the discrepancy was much larger at the time, the better player just completely steamrolls the other guy and shows you all the ideas. And your opponents are definitely not going to be the best players either. So this is going to be applicable to modern day noobs. But back then they were pros. So d4, knight f6, don't worry. This transposes back into a Queen's Gambit after some moves. And this is a typical Queen's Gambit position. As you can see, there is going to be the Carlsbad structure after a few more moves. The moves aren't important. The pawn structure is important. See, look at the pawns. It's like the Carlsbad structure. So White, again, both sides are just developing their pieces. Knight f3, rook e8, castles, bishop e7, bishop to g3, knight f8. And this is just a bunch of maneuvering. It's not really it doesn't really matter until rook b1 is played. What does rook b1 do? Well, White's intentions are very clear. He's going to thrust this pawn up and attack the base on c6, as I was talking about earlier. Knight h5, Black goes for the bishop. No thank you. g6, knight e5. And you can see that Black is moving his pieces towards the king side, trying to attack, but White is just building a really cozy shelter for his king, and Black hasn't really been doing much on the king side. He's just pushed a couple pawns and trapped his knight. So this is the way you don't really want to play. Knight g7, b4. White's already gotten going. I don't know what these knights are doing. Like, honestly, Black got himself tied up. He got the right idea by putting the pieces on the king side, but they're just kind of stuck, if you know what I mean. Knight a4 is played. b5 is also playable. It is indeed the best move. And the point is, like, okay, Black, you really don't want to take here because, first of all, you weaken d5, but second of all, you weaken b7. So this is not played. Knight a4 instead is played, but b5 will come all the same. Rook c1, he's just preparing. Knight takes, bishop d6. We just have a few trades, and now b5 comes through. And yes, Capablanca's advantage has diminished quite a bit. He should have played b5 earlier because Black's pieces were more stuck. Notice how Black traded off his pieces. Black was in a slightly disadvantageous position, right? He had less space. White has more space. And his pieces are cramped, so therefore he tries to exchange pieces and does so successfully. So kudos to Black for doing the right plan, but at the same time, this was a bit too late. White got in b5, and this was taken. If this pawn was not taken, White would take next, And the position's really easy, right? You just put pressure on this pawn. Say, as I was saying, like, I don't know, rook f8 for no reason. Takes, queen a6. You gotta defend this pawn, you gotta defend it. And all of a sudden, you see how weak this square is? Like, this is prone for, like, a knight or a rook or anything to land here. The position is so easy for white. You just pressure the pawn and you win. Black can do nothing but defend it. So black instead chooses to take this pawn, but in turn weakens this pawn and this pawn. Queen takes, knight e6, knight c3, attacking the pawn on d5 as well as b7. Rook d8, and now Capablanca takes this pawn. Queen a3 is played. This is kind of desperation as he hangs another pawn. Queen takes, and now knight b4 is played. Queen a4, and the moves aren't really important as Capablanca is up quite a bit of material. He can just steamroll these pawns to victory, but black's queen is just really offsides now. Knight c6, and his opponent already resigned, seeing as the writing was on the wall. His queen is just going to get trapped. Like, there is no way around it, pretty much. The queen is simply stuck. He threatens rook to a1, which just traps the queen. There is no way around it. And so, this is a perfect example of how to play. And let's see another example of a plan in this position. Another plan is to go... So, going back to the original Carlsbad position, another plan is to push the pawn to f3, and then your pawn to e4, kind of like in the Caro-Kann fantasy. You just want a big center. So let's take a look at this plan for white. d4, d5, c4, e6, and on the white end is Garry Kasparov, on the black end is Nigel Short, both incredibly good players, and you can see we have a Queen's Gambit, bishop g5, this is the main line, I believe, and something close to it. And so you notice, because white wants to go f3, e4, this is just another plan. It's not that one is better or the other's better. No, it's just that it's a different plan. White put his knight on e2 so that he can go f3, e4. Of course, if he moved his knight to f3, this would not be possible. Knight f8, b4, and this is a bit of a strange move, I guess. First of all, this pawn isn't really hanging, because after takes, you really don't want to take with the g-pawn, but it is the best move. And your king is just super weak. Otherwise, you take here, but then white wins the central pawn, and with the fork, he's going to be winning back his material. So this is a creative move, but it doesn't have much to do with white's actual plan, because white's actual plan was to storm in the center, not the queen side. This was just kind of a juke. It doesn't really matter. Knight e6, bishop h4, not giving the bishop away, and now he gives the bishop away because he gave it for a bishop, not a knight. Takes, queen d2, and white is just going to play this at the correct time. White does not want to play this right now because after takes, say white were to play this now, takes, and now d4 hangs and black is up a pawn. This would be bad. So white needs to protect this pawn before going on his endeavors. This is why this f3, e4 is a bit more risky and less traditional, but he gets it in after protecting his pawn. And all of a sudden, you notice how Kasparov is just putting so much pressure on this pawn that he's eventually going to force Short to take it, which is what he really doesn't want to do because he's going to have a big center and black can do nothing, absolutely nothing. Knight f4, takes, knight e6, queen e5. He's just putting more pressure on this pawn. He needs Short to make a decision rapidly. Queen g3, queen c7, queen h4. He's just dancing around right now, but as you can see, this pawn is still attacked. He has to do something. Knight g7, rook c1. He's going to take advantage of a pin. Oh no. Right? And so, queen d8, rook d1, protecting the pawn again. And knight a4, attacking this pawn. And finally, Short gives in. Now, he didn't really have much of a choice here. He could have played like something like this, holding on to this pawn for dear life. But knowing Kasparov, he probably would have sat a bit longer, or he could strike right away with pawn to e5, highlighting how bad this bishop really is. Nevertheless, Short takes, and the game is essentially over, even though this is pretty much the best move. Pawn takes, and you can see how helpless black is against this pawn phalanx. Knight c3, the pawn is just protected, and once you have a big center, you've pretty much won the game. You don't need to do anything. You just need to sit on your big center, and your opponent can't do anything about it. Pawn e5, though. And now the holes in black's position are highlighted. Takes, d5, knight d4, knight e4, and all of a sudden the position is just collapsing. These two pawns are at the forefront of it all, and it's the only reason why Black was able to do absolutely nothing the entire game. White just had too big of a pawn center, won a ton of material, and Black resigned. So you might be wondering, this seems really good for White. What are Black's plans in these kinds of positions? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because Black's plan, as we saw at the beginning, because his pawn chain is pointing towards the king side, Black wants to attack the king. And so I have another Kasparov game, and this time Kasparov is playing on the black end of things. So let's see how this goes. We just have a normal, just a kind of strange, actually, Queen's Gambit. But the structure is pretty much the same. As you can see, we have the Carlsbad, where there are pawns here and pawns on the king side. And as you can see, White is starting his minority attack. White knows the plan. And Black is going to have to attack in the center. Don't pay too much attention to the moves. And yeah, just notice here that Black is already doing quite well. Why is Black doing well here? Well, the thing is, first of all, as Black, you're defending. You have to neutralize White's counterplay. And so by taking control of the square on c4, Black can always just drop his knight in, and White can't do anything about it, to be honest. He can just lock up the king side. Lock up the queen side, which gives him free reign to attack the king on the king side. So let's see how Kasparov does this. It's a long game, but you can see the moves don't really matter too much. What you notice here is that he is just trying to lock down the queen side first. Defense is more important than attack in chess. So queen g5, he's starting to bring his pieces over to the king side. And this is an equal position, don't get me wrong. Everything is equal in chess. But do you know the plan is the question. And that's what changes the evaluation over time. So rook e6, not much is going on. But again, Black is just adding more pressure to the knight on e5. He's just getting more pieces into the game, quite frankly. Because the pieces weren't doing anything here. It's not like White is going to break through on the queen side after Black's controlling this b5 square so many times. And that's another idea. You can control b5 so much that your opponent can't ever break through. Queen b1, and as you can see, White is playing without a plan. He's just been shuffling his queen for the past, 10 moves. And Black has made tremendous progress. He's gotten his rooks up. He's gotten his rooks in. He's prevented White from breaking through. So what's he going to do? Queen h5. Queen b3, and f6. Finally, the knight is ousted. The knight moves away, and g5. Now, you might notice that c5 is weak, and yes, c5 is weak, and there's not much you can do about it. However, if White ever drops his knight in c5, right, it kind of prevents his ability from attacking on the queen side, which he wants to do, because he's blocking his own rook. So it's just a trade-off. Queen d1, White is still playing without a plan. He's just shuffling his pieces for no reason. Queen g6, Black avoids the queen trade because he just wants to attack on the king side, and it's clear that he wants to keep pieces on the board because White simply does not have a plan right now. He doesn't know what he's doing. Rook e7, this is just a prophylactic move, aiming against knight to c5, which would attack the rook and the queen. So he's just avoiding a queen exchange in a way. h5, and now you can see what Kasparov is doing. He's pushing his pawns here because he wants to attack the white king. White continues to play without a plan. If I go back, 20 moves or something like this, the position looks, pretty much, the position looks pretty much the exact same. Black has made a lot of progress, advanced a lot of pieces on the king side, and has brought his pieces to the king side, yeah. Advanced his pawns, gained space. What is White doing? Nothing. h4. And as you can see, Black is planning to break through with g4. What's Portish gonna do about this? Nothing. g4. He's just been shuffling his queen, for goodness sakes. And that's what you can get your opponents to do, right? You prevent all their pawn breaks, and then they don't know what to do. g4. Knight f4 is played. And now, finally, Black exchanges queens. Why does Black choose to exchange queens here? Well, first of all, let's say if White took here. This is indeed White's best choice, but this does look really scary to me. Black can just move his king somewhere. Rook g8, rook g7. Holy crap. Pawn to h3, and it looks like you're getting checkmated. Never mind that this knight's going to come in here too, right? So that looks really scary. But what happens here after knight f4 is that Black is able to push g3, suddenly weaken this e3 pawn. And yeah, this is the only reason why he allowed the queen exchange. This is just a winning endgame for Black. After rook to d3, king h6, it's clear that white's entire position is collapsing, and that black's kingside offensive broke through. He just advances his pieces, just getting his pieces into prime position, wins a pawn, and the rest is not really notable, to be honest. Black is just advancing his extra material, and white can't do anything because he's tied down to this pawn on e3. And funny enough, black eventually wins the game on the queen side. So what can we take away from this game? Well, all black did, really, is that he prevented white's pawn break with b5, and then he started moving all his pieces to the king side. Then he started advancing his pawns on the king side. White got scared and got himself into a really bad endgame where black eventually won. So, I hope this teaches you some fundamentals of the Queen's Gambit. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.